Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into something that's at the heart of Bitcoin, but I think a lot of people, maybe even people who follow Bitcoin, don't totally get proof of work.
Yeah, it's one of those things you hear it thrown around a lot, proof of work, but it's more than just, a techie term. It's really a core principle that makes Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin.
Secure, unchangeable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds, all the technical stuff, but I think it helps to zoom out for a second, look at proof of work through like a historical lens.
Historical. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Think about it this way. Those massive monuments ancient civilizations built, the pyramids, the Great Wall, Notre Dame, these things took an insane amount of work.
Resources, people, time. You're talking generations, right?
Absolutely. And they weren't just like practical buildings. They were meant to show off. A civilization flexing its muscles saying, look what we can do.
A testament to their power, their organization, their beliefs.
Right. It's like their proof of work, showing their commitment to something bigger than themselves. Now think of that same concept applied to the digital world. That's Bitcoin's proof of work.
So it's like a modern-day monument, but digital.
Exactly. But here's the thing. While those ancient structures were mostly symbolic, Bitcoin's proof of work is both symbolic and functional. It's this digital monument to decentralization, this unchangeable record. But it's also a living monument, constantly evolving every time a new block gets added.
And each block is basically what? Frozen energy.
Right. That's a great way to put it. Frozen energy. Before we go any further, though, I think it's worth explaining exactly how proof of work actually works for anyone who's not totally familiar.
Yeah, good point. Back to basics for a minute.
So at its heart, proof of work means you need to use a real, measurable amount of computing power to add any new information to a database. In Bitcoin, this work is miners solving really complex math problems. First one to crack the code gets to add the next block of transactions to the blockchain. And they get rewarded with, Bitcoin.
It's like a giant puzzle-solving competition. Winner gets to write the next chapter in Bitcoin's history. And the energy all those miners use, that's what keeps the whole thing secure.
That's the key. See, most systems, even the ones we think are secure, are really just what we call tamper-evident. Like, if someone messes with them, you can tell. But Bitcoin is aiming for something much stronger.
Tamper-proof.
Exactly. It's not just about noticing changes. It's about making it basically impossible to change anything in the first place.
Which brings us to immutability. Could you break that down a bit?
Sure. Imagine the Bitcoin blockchain as this giant public ledger, right? Or recording every single Bitcoin transaction ever made. Now, if you wanted to mess with that ledger, change something, you'd have to redo all the computational work that created it from the very beginning.
Talk about a massive undertaking.
It would take an insane amount of energy, basically impossible. Think of it like trying to rebuild the Great Wall of China brick by brick.
You're basically saying the energy invested is like a shield, a deterrent.
A shield, a deterrent, yeah. And that power comes from physics, the laws of thermodynamics.
Now we're getting really deep.
To put it simply, you can't create something from nothing. To alter the blockchain, you'd need to use more energy than exists, basically.
So that's the bedrock of Bitcoin's security. The energy itself is a barrier.
Right, and we're just scratching the surface here.
So we've established the energy poured into mining isn't just about making new Bitcoin, it's about securing the network, making sure that blockchain stays solid, unchanging. But this brings us to, the elephant in the room, that big criticism you always hear about Bitcoin. It's using too much energy, it's bad for the environment.
Yeah, it's a concern for sure, and it's worth talking about. But I think a lot of the conversations I hear, they miss some important context. You can't just look at Bitcoin in isolation. You have to compare it to what we already have, the traditional financial system. And when you do that, things get a lot more, nuanced.
Because we don't really think about the energy that goes into like running banks, all those buildings, data centers.
Exactly. It's massive. And then you've got like printing physical money, moving it around, ATMs, the whole global payment network. That stuff takes energy, a lot of it, but it's kind of hidden.
We don't see it, so we don't think about it.
Right. And then there's all the indirect costs. Keeping the whole financial system stable, that takes energy too. Think about the military, protecting things like the US dollar. When you add it all up, the traditional system, it uses way more energy than Bitcoin.
So it's not so simple as saying Bitcoin is wasteful. You have to compare it to what it's replacing. It's about the value you get for the energy you use.
Exactly. And with Bitcoin, we're getting a system that's objectively more secure, more transparent, harder to censor than what we have now. But that doesn't mean it can't get better. There are some really interesting solutions being developed to make Bitcoin even more efficient, more scalable.
You're talking about those layer 2 solutions, right? Like the Lightning Network. I know it's supposed to make Bitcoin transactions faster, cheaper, but I'd love to hear more about how it works and how it affects energy use.
So imagine the Lightning Network as like an extra layer built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. It lets you do transactions almost instantly, super cheap, but without compromising that security we were talking about, the security of the main blockchain.
So it's like adding an express lane to the highway, taking some of the pressure off, making everything flow better.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And because transactions on Lightning happen off-chain, they don't need as much computing power, so they use way less energy than those recorded on the main Bitcoin blockchain.
So less energy per transaction. Are there like real world examples of Lightning working already?
Oh, yeah, definitely. El Salvador, they made Bitcoin legal tender, right? Well, they've built the Lightning Network right into their national payment system through their Chivo wallet. People can buy everyday stuff with Bitcoin really quickly, really cheaply, and it barely uses any energy. It's a great example of how these layer 2 solutions can make Bitcoin more practical and more sustainable.
It seems like a lot of the criticism about Bitcoin's energy use comes from people not really understanding how it works or how it's changing, getting better.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And there's another side to this whole energy thing that people often miss. Bitcoin might actually help us move to renewable energy faster.
Okay, now that sounds kind of counterintuitive. How could something that needs so much energy help make energy greener?
Well, think about it. Bitcoin miners, they want the cheapest energy they can find, right? And more renewables, hydro, wind, geothermal, those are becoming the cheapest options.
So instead of being a drain on the grid, Bitcoin mining could actually be pushing us towards cleaner energy.
Exactly. And we're already seeing this happen. In places where there's a lot of renewable energy, Bitcoin miners are setting up shop. They're helping those renewable sources make more money, and they're reducing carbon emissions at the same time. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it definitely flips the script on how people usually see Bitcoin and the environment. Sounds like Bitcoin mining could actually be a part of the solution.
Hmm.
But do you have any like concrete examples of this in action?
Oh, tons. Texas is a good example. They've got all that wind power, right? So
Right.
a lot of Bitcoin miners have moved in. They're using that cheap wind energy.
Makes sense. Go where the resources are.
Exactly. And some miners are actually working directly with the wind farms, taking the extra energy that would normally just be wasted.
Oh, interesting. So they're like a buffer. They use up the excess energy when there's a lot of it, and then scale back when demand is high. Helps stabilize the grid, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's win-win. The miners get cheap, clean energy, and the wind farms, they make money off energy they would have just lost. Everybody benefits, even the planet.
It's a good example of how sometimes these market forces can lead to like unexpected positive outcomes. People think Bitcoin's just bad for the environment. It's more complicated than that. Could actually be a part of the solution.
Right. It's about looking at the bigger picture. And it all comes back to that analogy we were talking about earlier, Bitcoin as a modern monument. Those pyramids, Notre Dame, they showed what those civilizations were capable of. Well, Bitcoin's blockchain, it's kind of the same thing, but for our time.
Built with code and energy instead of stone and muscle. And it's not static like those old monuments. It's constantly changing, growing every time a new block gets added.
A real testament to human collaboration. People all over the world working together to keep this decentralized, unchangeable ledger going. But it's more than just a cool piece of technology. It's a statement, almost a philosophy.
The statement about what?
Trust, transparency,
Yeah.
resilience. Think about it. The world's getting more digital, right? And all these centralized systems, they can be manipulated, controlled. Bitcoin's different. It's saying this information is safe, this history can't be changed, and no one person or group gets to decide what happens to it.
It's a powerful message, especially these days. Data breaches, censorship, people not trusting institutions.
Exactly. That's what makes Bitcoin so fascinating, I think. It's not just some new tech. It's like a whole new way of organizing ourselves, a challenge to the way things are. And the energy it uses, well, that's a part of what makes it so strong, so resistant to attack. In the end, that might be what makes it truly transformative.
So the energy debate's important, don't get me wrong. But maybe it shouldn't distract us from the bigger picture. The potential Bitcoin has to change how we think about money, information, even trust.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We have to look at this with nuance, consider the good and the bad, and stay open to the possibilities.
I think you've given everyone a lot to think about today. Proof of work, It's not simple. There's a lot to unpack. We just scratched the surface here. Hopefully, we've inspired people to do some digging on their own.
Definitely. The more we understand these decentralized systems, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this digital world we're building.
Well said. So to everyone listening, keep learning, keep asking questions, and see where this whole Bitcoin rabbit hole takes you. It's a fascinating journey.
Until next time.